Well, hey everyone, I'm joined today by Lisa. Lisa and I are going to be talking about loneliness. But first, Lisa, hello. Would you like to
Hello.
share a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about what you do?
Sure, happy to do so. Like John said, my name is Lisa Zwagerman. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Wisconsin. What that means is I basically provide mental health counseling to people. Right now, I utilize a virtual platform, which means I just kind of talk to people online, which, given our current situation, has been really helpful, I think, for folks. Um, Many of the people that I work with are just experiencing some challenges, changes in life that they have found they don't really have the skills or the ability to cope with, and they're just kind of reaching out for some additional support.
Have you noticed a pretty big increase in maybe conversations or just mental health struggles as we've gone through kind of like last year?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think anyone would think that that's surprising,
Right.
given given everything that each individual has had to walk through. There are so many things that people are experiencing for the first time that is just kind of really unknown. And I think one of the benefits to all of this is that, like, virtual help, virtual mental health counseling, virtual peer support has become more readily available for people, and so that's kind of a great thing. But the pandemic on a whole, as I said before, it's just really kind of uncharted territory for a lot of us, and completely normal for people to not know what to do and to just kind of seek out somebody who can listen to them or who can reassure them or who can come alongside and try to strategize maybe some coping for what people are walking through. So
I love that. Thank you so much for being someone who reaches out and connects with those people and helps them walk through the things that they're going through. It really is, I think, a powerful tool now that we can just connect via like the virtual things
yeah.
for counseling or for conversations. Or I love that you even mentioned just friends, just being able to
Mhm.
connect that way and kind of normalize it.
Yeah.
Um, well, if you don't mind, let's dive into our conversation about loneliness.
Sure.
Just overall, Lisa, how would you describe loneliness?
Well, loneliness, when I think about it, and what I've learned about loneliness over the years too, is pretty multifaceted, right? So, um, technically speaking, loneliness is what is considered a perceived state or a perceived feeling state. And so it's really all about one's own perception of what is happening in their life. We typically see feelings of loneliness when somebody has like a discrepancy between what they think an ideal situation for themselves is or should be, and what their perceived actual situation is. So, an example being, I have an ideal of what my relationships should look like, and right now, that's not what they look like. That can cause some loneliness. And so you think about that outside of relationships, and it can just kind of filter into kind of all aspects of life. But the big thing here to kind of think about is that it's largely based upon perception. So one person's own perception of their situation is what matters here, right? So um, yeah. So
Hmm.
if people are experiencing a situation in which they don't feel it's ideal, chances are there's going to be some feelings of loneliness.
So it's kind of like this breakdown of expectation versus reality.
Certainly. Yep.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely. Mhm.
As you've chatted with people, as you've interacted with people, how have you noticed that loneliness affects their life?
Sure. So I don't think it's shocking to say most people experience loneliness at some point in their life. Um, and this can be for any number of reasons. This can be because of a relationship change. This can be because of a physical change, or you move to a new city, you have to change jobs, you um, have just any sort of kind of change in your life. and what is currently happening is not what you kind of want to be happening, or something to that extent. Most people can sort of flush through that and kind of work through that and figure that out. But unfortunately, what we know about people who experience like chronic loneliness is that it can kind of spiral into a little bit more significant mental health problems. Maybe like a tendency towards depression, or even kind of like substance use, which makes sense, right? People lean towards using substances when they aren't feeling the way that they want to feel. Um,
Yeah, that's really
I,
interesting. It sounds like there's this scale of loneliness. I guess that makes sense, right? It's not just you're lonely or you're not.
sure.
You mentioned like chronic loneliness. What um like what's the difference? What's the difference between someone who's maybe chronically lonely versus maybe just experiencing a little bit of a very normal reaction to a hard situation?
Sure. I think, and I don't know what the textbook is with this, but
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
what I would consider chronic loneliness would be somebody who finds themselves alone in like multiple different aspects of their life. So we'll kind of talk about this a little bit more, but so maybe they experience loneliness when it comes to intimate relationships, loneliness when it comes to their social relationships or grouping, loneliness in kind of their collective or their network. So people who also feel lonely or loneliness chronically have a harder time um, like healing from injuries, illness, which makes sense because if you think about somebody who for a very long time has not had a network, has not been connected, has not felt supported or socially engaged, it makes kind of all aspects of their life a bit more difficult to walk through.
That really
I
does
don't know if
make
that makes
sense.
sense.
No, yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I was wondering, could you chat a little bit about maybe some misconceptions that people have about loneliness? Because I'm sure everyone has this thought right away, and that could be accurate, but there also could be some parts that people haven't considered or maybe have a misunderstanding about.
Yeah, definitely. I know for me, I used to think that being alone was like loneliness. So, and that might be a misconception for a lot of people.
Mm,
Loneliness is not just as simple as being alone. So we know many people can be alone physically and feel completely fulfilled and completely where they need to be, like they're fulfilling their purpose. Loneliness is different. It can manifest in different ways. We know, like mentioned earlier, people experience loneliness in one to all three ways. In the intimate setting, so the need that we as humans have for a partner or for a confident, someone to confide in. It doesn't have to be a spouse, it doesn't have to be a family member, a friend, but it needs to be somebody that you can confide in. So if you're missing a true connection with another human, you can experience loneliness. Another big aspect of it is the social connection. So, do you have a group of friends, or maybe you're on a team that can kind of ward off loneliness? And when there's a lack in that aspect or in that regards in somebody's life, then they can feel loneliness surrounding that that aspect of things, the social aspect of things. And then there's what is referred to as the collective piece of being human, where you're involved in maybe a network, a community, a church, some sort of group that you belong to that you feel like you have purpose in. Um, One of the getting back to like misconceptions, sort of, it's strange because I think a lot of people can actually feel loneliness when they're surrounded by people, which I know I've experienced that, and that was really strange for me. But I think it's more about fulfilling the purpose in your life and where you are in regards to your social needs, your intimate needs, your collective needs as a whole, And when you're fulfilling that purpose, there's often not that piece of loneliness. So what I think we see most times in folks who are experiencing loneliness is that there's this missing purpose, whether it be with others or in, I guess, deeds or works
Yeah,
in
that's really
general.
interesting. Yeah, I wonder if someone's, so say if someone's watching this right now and they feel this loneliness, and they're not really sure which of those three sources that loneliness is coming from. Is there
Mm.
like some, I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit. Is there like some sort of like question or way that they could maybe, I hesitate to use the word
Yeah.
diagnose, but kind of figure out, okay, which one of these areas is this loneliness coming from?
Yeah, well, I think it's good to kind of, yeah, think about them in three different regards. So maybe ask yourself, do I have at least one person in my life who I can confide in, that I can be completely honest with, that I feel supports me and loves me no matter what happens? And if you have that, then you have probably some sort of intimate relationship. Um, Ask yourself, do I have some sort of connection to a social group? And that can look different for everybody. Like I said, I mean, that could be you're part of a sports team or a virtual chess club or
Yeah.
um, an exercise group or an art exploration group, something like that. And if you have something that you're giving to and that you're kind of receiving from in a social sense, then likely that's not what is causing your loneliness. And then the larger one would be the collective piece, right? So if you feel like you're really disconnected within your community, then you might be kind of experiencing collective loneliness. Um, and some of the things that are kind of, I mean, it's so strange to think about this past year, especially with loneliness, because people are undoubtedly experiencing this in one way or another, because maybe they have been involved in groups prior, or they had the ability to get together with networks, and that's kind of been, you know, obviously we're not doing much of that. So yeah.
Hmm. Do you ever find where you're, maybe you're discussing this with someone and they feel like they have, um, maybe one of those relationships that should be providing that connection, that should be meeting that need, but it isn't?
Mm.
Um, does that ever come up?
Yeah, definitely. I think that brings up a really good point, because people can be in relationships, people can be in intimate relationships and feel very lonely.
Mm.
I know whenever there are aspects to a relationship where one person or the other are not getting their needs fulfilled, that is that's a place where loneliness can be and can grow, unfortunately. um I think too, was talking with some parents too, how even though they're never, again, they're never alone, they feel extremely lonely because they feel like they're in it all by themselves, or they've got nobody on their team when it comes to taking care of these tiny humans. And even if they have a spouse, they're just not feeling that support um, from that.
Yeah. So if someone is experiencing one of these forms, or it's a parent, or whatever it is, um, I mean, even if it's a straightforward answer, right? What are some things that somebody can do to help kind of alleviate some of that loneliness, or
Yeah.
kind of grapple with that?
Yeah. So I think the main word to think about here is connection. And often we think about connection as being with other people, but I think if we broaden our idea of it, connection can be, yes, with other people, yes, with groups, but it can be to that purpose too. So bringing yourself into the moment that you're currently in. So why am I here in this moment? How can I connect with where I am now and find purpose in this moment? Because that purpose and that connection will combat the feelings of loneliness that we kind of get into our own minds about, right? Like if you're confident that you're in this place for a reason, you're connected to it, then the loneliness will just kind of go away for the most
That's
part.
really interesting. Yeah. So it's like, um, that's a huge step. So somebody's like in the moment feeling that loneliness, and they can just like almost take stock of what they're going through,
Mhm.
and try to connect. That's really interesting. Um, I know, and this might be especially applicable to parents, but say that they know someone, or someone that's watching knows someone that they really feel like is experiencing loneliness. Um, what are some things to maybe share or say to that person?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things whenever we have somebody who's struggling in our lives is to come alongside next to them and to be truly loving and truly empathetic. Um, what that means is that you come and you say, like, hey, I'm here with you. What's going on for you? I think we do a disservice to the people in our lives when we quote unquote like silver lining things for them. So say somebody comes to me and they say like, "Oh, I'm really struggling. I feel really lonely." If I say something like, "Oh, well, yeah, I'm really sorry about that, but at least you have X, Y, or Z. At least you have a job, or at least you have this." I mean, looking for silver linings can be beneficial, but when we're really trying to connect and support the people in our lives, meeting them where they're at and telling them that you care about them and showing them that you care for them, which again, I think is through this connection, right? That is going to make a bigger difference than like trying to make them feel better maybe in the moment. It's more of like a long-term investment, long-term sort of haul, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because several years ago, I was feeling like some strong feelings of loneliness, and I confided in a friend, and I'll never forget his response. He was like, "Oh, well, just don't feel that way anymore."
Right. That's
I
super
was like,
unhelpful.
"Oh, okay, now I just won't."
Yeah.
I've solved it,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really work that way. Um,
And I think it's helpful too to think about like say you're talking with a friend who's really struggling with being lonely and they really want to have a relationship. They really want a loving relationship and they are not in one. And if you yourself are in a loving relationship, I think it's good to be cognizant of what we say to people who are kind of observing our lives as well. I don't know if that makes any
no,
sense.
that makes a
So
lot of sense. So, is there anything in that you would kind of caution people to avoid sharing or saying to someone in that moment?
yeah, I think being aware, right, of our
Yeah.
own situation first and foremost is very helpful and very beneficial. Again, I think not jumping to answering or solving people's problems um, by saying like, "Oh, well, maybe you should do this or maybe you should do that." Chances are, if somebody is really seeking a relationship, they've tried quite a few different things and those haven't worked out. And so to truly support that person, the best thing to do is to be just kind of meet them where they're at, like, and connect with them and say, I know, like, I'd really love to talk some more with you about this, or let's get a coffee or a virtual coffee or something. Um, Now, there are definitely ways for people who are struggling with loneliness to kind of connect. Um, and there's been some research done actually. I was just reading through, it's pretty cool, especially in pandemic times. So there's something like if you know at least six of your neighbors, it increases the likelihood that you're going to have like a positive outlook on life just by knowing, like just by
Interesting.
knowing six neighbors. And then also like taking time to just wave to somebody like through a window or even whatever is beneficial for both of you. So, and if you think about that, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're taking at least a little bit of time to invest in somebody else and to connect with somebody.
I love that. That's super practical too. Like wave at someone, like
Right.
talk to your neighbors when you get the chance to see them. Um, I wonder if I could circle back. You kind of mentioned this topic, and I'm sure there's lots of people watching that that have felt this way, for those people right now that maybe they aren't into intimate relationship, they don't have that close thing, but they desire that, and because of that, they're feeling that loneliness.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything that you would like say to them, encourage them with? Um, Maybe not necessarily. So from like your perspective, so if they're as they're watching right now, what's something they could do that would help, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty deep conversation. Um, and right off the bat, what I like to talk to people about is obviously themselves and what are they doing as far as seeking out their purpose in life currently, and spend some time in really being the person that they are supposed to be individually, um, because that ultimately most of the time, if it's meant to be, will kind of lead to someone else or lead you to connect with somebody, in a more deep and meaningful way. Um, I think it's really hard when we compare ourselves to other people too, and maybe that's what I was kind of getting at with the whole not looking at someone else's life and nitpicking it. But often when someone's feeling very lonely because they really want a close relationship, they really want an intimate relationship, it gets really exacerbated by comparisons. I mean, they look at, and what I mean by that is maybe they're looking at all of their friends' lives or they're looking at things on social media and it looks like everybody is so happy in their relationship. And that can only be detrimental.
Mm,
So I think, the best idea is to continue to kind of work on yourself and to continue to find what is the purpose, for your life currently, where you are, um, and how can that lead to opening doors to new relationships.
yeah, it almost sounds like the major heartbeat there is shifting perspective, shifting
Mhm.
focus away from one thing, maybe to, like you mentioned, that purpose, that connection.
Mhm.
Mm. Um, Earlier, you talked about kind of chronic loneliness. I'm curious, is there a point in someone's kind of loneliness journey, as they kind of are in these feelings, where you would advise them maybe to seek some professional counseling or professional help as they kind of wrestle through those thoughts?
Yeah, when we talk about chronic loneliness, I think, and seeking help for it, I think it is beneficial when somebody is like over, I don't know, say 6 months or something. If you're continually coming back to this place of feeling very lonely, of feeling like you are not fulfilled and you don't know where to go for finding purpose, you don't know how to connect, you don't know, there's multiple aspects of your life in which you're not having any sort of connection. I think that would be beneficial for somebody to speak with a professional at that point in time. Um, Additionally, I think I'm sort of a big advocate for counseling. So I have like this blanket statement that counseling is great for everybody because it helps you grow and it helps you, um, understand yourself in a way that you may not necessarily understand until maybe years down the road. So quickens our own understanding of ourselves oftentimes. Um, but it's not realistic for everybody, and I understand that. Um,
Yeah, I know for at the Ridge, one of the reasons why we're doing these series, having these conversations, is we really want to eliminate a lot of the stigma around mental health,
mhm,
particularly seeking help and guidance for our mental health. And I know we're really big proponents of counseling and seeking professional help for anything really.
yeah,
And then I guess if we liken it to a doctor, you do go in for checkups. Even if you feel healthy, even if you feel good, you'll go in for checkups to make sure everything is going well.
right.
Um, do you have kind of clients that will do that with you, or just curious?
Yeah, I would say that some of them utilize it more as they think of counseling as part of their mental health and mental well-being, just the same way as you would think about your gym subscription or your virtual online physical class activities that you do. They utilize a mental health counselor in that regard. I think what's super beneficial about being involved in a church community is that often some of those things can be, um, people can kind of utilize the church community for some of that fulfillment. And so that's important too. Um, Sorry, I wanted to go back to one thing about, oh yeah. So like if people are dealing with chronic loneliness, we can talk about
Mhm.
that a little bit more, and like
Yeah.
when to seek more treatment, because of some of the things that can kind of come from chronic loneliness, like a tendency towards like depression or anything like that, or depression symptoms. Um, and if it gets to a point where the person is having trouble with like daily tasks, like finding motivation to get out of bed, finding it hard to make a phone call to talk with a family member or friend, it might be worth kind of exploring that with a professional.
That's
Too.
really good insight. I wonder if I can ask you one more question.
For sure.
Um, you mentioned a faith community, and I know you yourself have faith. How have you, and for maybe some of your clients or patients that have incorporated faith into their mental health, maybe with their loneliness, how have you seen that play out? What does that look like when you incorporate Jesus and God into kind of someone's battle with loneliness?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that the Bible so beautifully aligns what what we need to feel fulfilled to avoid
Mm.
loneliness, in that um, it has resources for us and how our relationships, how our intimate relationships should look, our friendships, our family relationships, how those can and what those should look like. It has examples for us on what social relationships can look like and what the collective relationships should look like. And the church itself provides opportunity for that, right? So we know that when people are connected, they're less likely to experience loneliness. So the church is an obvious solution for that, right? Because there's opportunities for people to be connected. There's opportunities for people to serve. There's opportunities for connection, for accountability with others. So I think that it's an absolute, like I said, it's a beautiful way for people to kind of w- keep away from loneliness, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
totally. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I know I've learned a lot here from our conversation. I really love the kind of the three different sources that loneliness can come from, um, and just I think one of my biggest takeaways is as I'm chatting with someone who may be kind of going through loneliness, um, really taking stock of my own life and in terms of my skewed perspective on the situation, so that I'm not saying things or kind of bringing. Um, a silver lining that doesn't need to be shared, but instead just truly listening to what's going on. So,
Yeah,
um, thanks, Lisa.
absolutely. Thank you.